Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN. Now, whether you've been following this channel for a long time, or you've only heard a few of the creepy stories and mysteries I've covered, you've no doubt already realised the value of staying safe and secure, even while doing something as mundane as surfing the web. One of the best ways to protect yourself online is by using a VPN. That's where Nord comes in. NordVPN's double data encryption helps you stay hidden online and gives you increased digital anonymity. If you've never tried using a VPN before because you're worried that all sounds too technical, then fear no more. NordVPN is extremely easy to use. You can connect with just a single click and boom, you're protected. Their VPN is super fast and reliable, with over 5,400 servers across 59 countries. That not only means you can connect to a server near you for increased speed, but you can also connect to servers in far-off countries to access shows, movies and platforms that aren't available where you live. So no matter where you are, with NordVPN you can stay up to date with all your favourite content. For instance, I currently live in Japan, so if I ever get a hankering to watch some classic British sitcoms from back home, I can just open up the NordVPN map, click on the United Kingdom, and after just a few seconds I can log on to any of my streaming services and have access to their library of UK shows. Right now they have a special deal on for all of my viewers. Head over to nordvpn.com/masquerade or use promo code MASQUERADE and you'll make a huge saving on their 2-year plan. They'll even throw in an extra month for free. At only the price of a coffee per month, and with a 30-day money-back guarantee, you've really got nothing to lose. Find that unique URL in the description or comment section, take advantage of this devilish deal today, and enjoy all the protections and conveniences of NordVPN. In northeast Hong Kong, there's a popular recreational area called Sai Kung. It's famous for its hiking spots, beaches, and for its inordinate number of disappearances and deaths. Sai Kung itself isn't particularly big, but the natural beauty of the peninsula has basically remained untouched, and it's full of long and winding trails, so it's easier to see how people might get lost there. That being said, there are signs and markers all along the hiking routes, and each signpost has its own unique set of coordinates written on it. If you were to get lost somewhere, or feel like you were too weak to continue your hike, all you'd have to do is call for help, state the coordinates on the nearest sign, and help would be on the way. That makes it all the weirder that so many people have vanished or perished while exploring Sai Kung, especially when you consider the mysterious circumstances surrounding each incident. In September of 2009, an off-duty police officer was out hiking alone in Sai Kung. He called the emergency services for help and told the operator that he was lost and needed to be rescued. Thankfully, he was right next to one of the marked signposts, so he read off its coordinates to the operator. Strangely, the coordinates he provided didn't match with any on record, meaning the operator had no idea where the officer actually was. The call then ended abruptly, and despite an extensive search and rescue effort, the lost officer was never seen or heard from again. To this day, his whereabouts, or more accurately, the whereabouts of his body, remain a mystery. This incident quickly captured the public's imagination, and a movie was even made about the officer's disappearance, called Missing. His mysterious vanishing didn't surprise some locals, however. It had long been believed that Sai Kung was an ominous place. According to Cantonese folklore, the peninsula was home to some sort of otherworldly portal or barrier, which one should never cross. Only 1 month after the officer went missing, a male and 4 females were out hiking in the same area. The male became tired and told the women to go ahead, said that he'd catch up. He never did. The women went back to look for him, but found no trace of their missing friend. 2 days later, his body showed up next to the trail where they had been searching. His cause of death remains unclear to this day. This man was a Boy Scout troop leader and knew his way around nature very well, adding to the bizarreness of his demise. Later that same year, a bus driver was out hiking alone in Sai Kung. When he didn't return home that day, his family tried calling his phone to check that he was okay. To their surprise, a fisherman answered it, saying that he had found the phone in a river. The bus driver was never found. In 2011, another man called the emergency services, saying that he was lost on a Sai Kung hiking trail. Just like the lost officer before him, his call suddenly disconnected, and he was never seen or heard from again. a number of other strange deaths have occurred on the Saikung Peninsula, dating all the way back to 2005, right up to more recent incidents in 2019 and even 2020. In each of these instances, a lone male's body was found, resting beside a trail. Foul play is suspected in at least one of these cases, but for the most part, there's been little evidence to suggest that there's a serial killer loose on Saikung, and the majority of these deaths have been attributed to accidental falls. But what about the people who have completely disappeared? The Saikung hiking trails are all clearly marked, well maintained, and aren't known to be treacherous routes. Most of the dead and missing were experienced hikers, and were knowledgeable about the area, and about navigation and basic survival skills. But here's the most interesting part. There is an account from a man named Chung who became lost in Saikung, but actually managed to make it out alive. According to Chung, he was out hiking in the area when he suddenly and inexplicably lost consciousness. He awoke at 8 PM and tried to get back to civilization, but in his own words said that, "When I tried to leave, it was weird. No matter how far I walked, I never got any closer to getting out." On his second day lost in the wilderness, he saw 2 people and shouted out to them. They didn't react to him, but they both disappeared right in front of his eyes. After resting for a while, he saw another figure come running right out of the tree line. He tried chasing after them, hoping they might help him. "I chased that man all the way down," said Chung. "He changed into people I knew and people I didn't know during that chase, but when I caught up, they all disappeared." Exhausted, Chung fell asleep. When he awoke on the third day, he noticed that several items he had been carrying had disappeared. He also realized that his surroundings had changed, and that he wasn't where he had fallen asleep the previous night. He described the area as having the vibe of an old graveyard, and during that day, he apparently saw many people that all disappeared as he reached out to them. On the fourth day, he awoke to find his surroundings had changed yet again, and that the rocks around him were all making a strange, rumbling noise. He made his way down the trail in front of him, and all the while, the rocks continued to rumble. Eventually, he ran into a young guy from Thailand. Difference was, this guy didn't disappear. He was real, and he lent Chung his cell phone to call for help. After 4 days, Chung finally emerged from the Saikung Mountains. One strange thing that he and his rescuers noticed was that Chung hadn't been bitten by any mosquitoes or other bugs during his whole ordeal. This was June, and the mountains of Saikung were absolutely swarming with the little buggers, making his lack of bite marks extremely strange. A weird story to say the least, but what do you think? Did Chung and the less fortunate souls before him pass through the so-called Saikung barrier and enter some other plane of existence, an alternate dimension? Or can his strange experiences be chalked up to dehydration and exhaustion? Is there some mysterious portal on the Hong Kong Peninsula, or are all of these deaths and disappearances simply the result of accidents? If so, whatever happened to the remains of the other experienced hikers who still haven't been found? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. A big shout out to Reddit user Hey Lurker here for making one of the only English write-ups of this next mysterious incident. There's something about the open ocean that's inherently unsettling to a lot of people. We all know that the sea can be a cruel mistress, and that in her dark depths she also harbours a lot of equally dark secrets. Well, here's one of them. The year was 1968. The place? La Palma Island in the Canaries. More specifically, Tazacorte, a small town which many transport ships and fishing vessels called home. One such ship at the time was El Fausto, a ship large enough, sturdy enough, and fast enough that it was used for both fishing and transport purposes. On July 20th of that year, she set sail to El Hierro, another island only 50 miles south of La Palma, bringing with her a cargo of agricultural explosives. 3 experienced sailors were on board. 2 brothers, Ramon and Eliberto Hernandez, and their cousin, Miguel Acosta, all of them in their 40s. The men were familiar with El Fausto, having crewed her many times in the past. After a 7-hour-long journey, El Fausto finally reached its destination and unloaded its delivery. While there, the three-man crew met a man named Julio Garcia, a fellow native of La Palma. Julio had just gotten word that his daughter back home was extremely sick, and he needed to get back to La Palma as soon as possible. He approached the crew of El Fausto and told them about his predicament. Since the next liner back to La Palma wouldn't depart for another 2 days, the three sailors agreed to let Julio come back with them, free of charge. On July 21st, at 2:30 AM, El Fausto and the 4 men set off on another 7-hour voyage back to Tazacorte. Well, those 7 hours passed, and El Fausto still hadn't arrived back home. That wasn't too unusual. They could have been delayed for a number of reasons. But as the hours passed with no sign of the ship or the 4 men aboard her, the sailors' families started to become worried. El Fausto's owner, Rafael Acosta, relative of the 3-man crew, sent another ship out along the exact same route to search for them. Surely this boat would come across the El Fausto on its way, right? Wrong. The waters on the way to El Hierro were clear, and there was no sign of El Fausto sailing back to La Palma. That didn't make any sense. Ramon, Eliberto and Miguel had made that same journey countless times in much harsher conditions. In fact, sailing conditions that day were almost perfect. The sea was calm, and visibility clear. There was only one explanation. El Fausto must have gone off route for some reason. But why? El Fausto and her crew were immediately reported missing, and all other vessels in the area were asked to keep an eye out for the ship. Planes were sent to scout the ocean from above. It was only a matter of time before El Fausto was found, everyone thought. That prediction turned out to be overly optimistic. Despite it being a clear day, neither the planes nor any of the other boats in the area found any sign of El Fausto. It was like it had vanished into thin air. A horrible thought occurred to everyone back on La Palma. El Fausto must have sunk. 4 days passed with no updates. Just as everyone was starting to come to terms with the loss of all 4 souls aboard El Fausto, the search and rescue team received some amazing news. A British ship had reportedly just spotted El Fausto, floating 120 miles west of La Palma. How it wound up so far off course was anyone's guess, but the British reported that all 4 men on board were still alive, though obviously a little worse for wear, and said that they'd be happy to tow them back home to Tazacorte. For some bizarre reason, the crew on El Fausto said no thank you. The British were confused, of course, and asked what sort of mechanical problems the ship had suffered. Nothing, replied El Fausto's crew. The boat was fine, their communications were fine, nothing was wrong. All 4 men appeared to be of sound mind and weren't delirious or confused about the situation. They once again rejected the British offer to be towed back home, and instead simply asked for enough fuel to make it back home on their own. The British gave them enough fuel, food and water to sustain them for 18 more hours, more than enough to make the journey back home. When news of this broke back in Tazacorte, the locals all began to celebrate. Their 4 lost sons would be home by sunset. Everyone gathered at the port to welcome back the lost men, including, of course, all their family members. There was drinking, and music, and dancing, and a lot of confusion when the sun finally did set, and there was still no sign of El Fausto. The crew's families waited on the dock all night. By morning, it became clear that the ship was now missing for a second time. Planes and ships were sent from the Spanish mainland, all with one clear objective: find the El Fausto. The government spent over $2 million on the rescue effort, but just like before, the elusive hunk of metal had vanished without a trace. After 2 weeks of searching, they gave up the hunt. It wouldn't be until October 9th, 2.5 months after the ship had first gone missing, that an Italian vessel actually came across El Fausto, floating in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean. Nobody was on board. Not Ramon, not Eliberto, not Miguel, not Julio. The ship was in perfect working condition. There were no signs of fighting or damage, no records or logbooks, no indication about what had happened whatsoever. Not on the top deck, at least. One of the Italian crew members climbed down into El Fausto's engine room. What he found inside almost made him throw up. On the floor in front of him was the unclothed, partially mummified body of a man. A radio and notebook were found resting next to him. Many pages in this notebook had been torn out, but one remaining page in particular stood out. Spanish writing covered the page, and whatever it said, it appeared to be the end page of a much longer message. The Italians told the Spanish they would tow El Fausto to Venezuela, and from there would send them all the evidence they had. Here's where another strange twist occurred in the case. 2 days later, the Spanish authorities received a telegram from the Italian ship. According to them, while en route to Venezuela, El Fausto suddenly and inexplicably sunk. The ship had been lost to the sea, taking with it the half-mummified body on board and most of the evidence. Well, that didn't make any sense. The ship was reportedly in perfect condition. How had this happened? Nobody seemed to know. The remaining evidence that was found on El Fausto eventually arrived in La Palma. Julio Garcia's wife recognized the notebook immediately and confirmed that the message had been written in her husband's handwriting, indicating that the body most likely belonged to Julio. He had scrawled a goodbye message to his wife in the notebook, though it was clear that the beginning pages had been removed. The message ended with the cryptic words, "Don't ever tell our children about what happened to me. You know that God wanted this fate for me. Love you." It's clear from those words that Julio knew he was about to lose his life, though since his remains are now somewhere at the bottom of the Atlantic, we'll never know how it came to end for sure. Why were the beginning pages of his message missing? What did they say? Did they contain an explanation about what had happened? Where were Ramon, Eliberto, and Miguel? Why had El Fausto been found so far off course? Why did the men reject the help of the British ship that found them? Why did El Fausto itself suddenly sink without any further explanation from the Italians? Why does none of this seem to make any sense? To this day, nobody knows the answers to any of those questions. Many theories have been thrown around, none of them particularly convincing. No matter how you look at it, the mystery of El Fausto doesn't make any sense. With the El Fausto now at the bottom of the sea, the truth about what happened on board will probably never surface. The cases I examine almost always involve deaths and disappearances, but given the subject matter of this video, let's take the opportunity to explore a different kind of mystery altogether. Something a little more otherworldly. In 1972, ufologist J. Allen Hynek created a scale of close encounters designed to help bring scientific credence to the study of extraterrestrials. There are close encounters of the first kind, in which a person merely sees an unidentified flying object. Close encounters of the second kind, in which the alleged UFO causes some sort of physical effect on the observers or the environment. And most infamously, close encounters of the third kind, where an actual extraterrestrial being is seen by witnesses. Considered by many to be the most credible report of an alien encounter in history, this is the story of the Ariel School Incident, a close encounter of the third kind. Located in the rural town of Ruwa, Zimbabwe, Ariel is a private primary school whose student body is made up of youngsters from the wealthiest families in the area, some of them native Zimbabweans, many of them from South Africa and the UK. It was September 14th, 1994. A group of 62 students, all of them aged between 5 and 12, were out playing in a large field just behind the school during break time, away from the view of all the teachers, who were inside having a meeting. It was 10:15 AM. Halfway through the recess, some of the students came rushing back inside, many of them shaken and clearly terrified. They started babbling to the teachers about two creatures that they had just met in the schoolyard. According to the testimonies of those 62 children, while out playing in the field, they noticed several silver orbs floating above the school. These objects occasionally flashed red before vanishing in a burst of light, only for them to reappear moments later. Shortly afterwards, a large, disc-like silver object descended from the sky and began hovering just above the ground. 4 smaller discs floated down alongside it. All the students rushed to see what these objects were. When they got close, they noticed 2 humanoid figures which they all described as little men, both of them about 3 feet tall. One of them sat atop the main craft. The other ran back and forth along the ground, seemingly examining the terrain. After 15 minutes, the crafts ascended back into the sky and out of view, taking the 2 creatures with them. Now here's where the story gets interesting. Obviously, the teachers all thought the children were just being silly and playing some sort of imaginative game. When they all went home after school and told their parents, the adults started taking their claims a little more seriously. There were 62 kids all saying the exact same thing after all, so they were all individually questioned. All of their accounts of the incident were disturbingly similar. Firstly, they were asked to describe the little men that they saw. Consistently, they all talked about the men having large, elongated heads, stretched, rugby-like eyeballs that sat low on their cheeks, small mouths with no lips, no discernible ears, and long, scrawny necks. They also all mentioned them wearing black, shiny, skin-tight suits, and that they both had long, black hair. Now you might think the students' descriptions were so consistent, because that pretty much sounds like a stereotypical alien, but bear in mind that many of these youngsters didn't even know what an alien was, and weren't even familiar with the concept of them. In interviews, many of the local children referred to them as tokoloshi, evil goblins from African folklore that feast on children. Others thought that they were magic gardeners, given how they were going up and down the grounds. Only a handful of them brought up the idea of aliens. The fact that the students came from a diverse set of backgrounds meant that a lot of different interpretations came up, suggesting that none of them had been coached on what to say. Many of these interviews were filmed, and if you watch the footage, you'll notice that all the students appear to be acting very authentically and believably. As one female student put it, "I swear by every hair on my head and the whole Bible that I'm telling the truth." The most scary part of their testimonies came when they were asked what the little men actually did when they landed. 12 of the students were asked this, and with varying degrees of eloquence, they all said the same thing. They all mentioned that when they got close to the 2 beings, time seemed to slow down or stop. They said that one of the entities noticed them and then disappeared into thin air, only to reappear moments later. The 2 now motionless beings stared at the students. When the students looked into the creature's quote-unquote horrible eyes, they instantly became transfixed. The beings then communicated with them telepathically. According to the students, the little men flashed terrifying images into their heads, which they interpreted as a frightening warning. A warning about environmental destruction and the dangers of technology and pollution, concepts many of them weren't even aware of beforehand. According to one student, he interpreted the images as meaning, "The world is going to end. Maybe because we don't look after our planet or the air. Like all the trees will go down, and there'll be no air. People will be dying." Those thoughts came from the man, in the man's eyes. So, what makes this case so credible in the eyes of ufologists and alien enthusiasts? Well, firstly, the fact that there were 62 witnesses, all with a consistent story. Many of these witnesses were unaware of the concept of a UFO, but they all used folklore creatures from their respective cultures to paint a very similar picture about their interpretations. Bad child actors are easy to spot, but the footage of all of them describing the ordeal comes across as totally natural, unrehearsed and uncoached. Not to mention, many of them were interviewed years later as adults, and they all stand by what they said back in 1994, and seem to have genuinely been emotionally affected by their experience. Unlike most people who fake encountering aliens, these men and women aren't attention seekers, and have seemingly done their best to avoid bringing up the incident, worried about being judged or publicly humiliated if they talk about it. Finally, it's also worth noting that on the morning of the incident, numerous eyewitnesses across South Africa reported seeing a meteor-like object flash through the sky. The prospect of this being some sort of prank is highly unlikely, given how seriously such claims would have been treated in rural Zimbabwe, particularly back in 1994. Given that many parents would have genuinely feared their kids being demonically possessed by a tokoloshi, this would have been no joking matter. That leaves only 2 possible explanations: mass hysteria or authentic close encounter. Personally, I'd side with Scully over Mulder on this one. I'm much more inclined to go with a terrestrial explanation rather than an extraterrestrial one. The students got collectively excited about something in the playfield, and then suggestive questioning by interviewers convinced them all that they really had that experience. That being said, many people believe otherwise, and cite this as one of the most credible accounts of alien interaction for all the reasons previously stated. But what do you think? Little green men or little white lies? The truth is out there. A much more grounded mystery with a spacey context for this one. Founded by a man called Edward Mielnik back in 1990, AnimeWimp was a Polish cult that held some very strange beliefs, to say the least. According to Mielnik, 8 billion years ago, Earth was visited by 2 spaceships, one of them containing the Slavic peoples, who originally come from the planet Atlanta. Like many other cultists, the followers of AnimeWimp wholeheartedly believe that the world was soon about to end, and that the only way to survive the apocalypse was by escaping in their Slavic spaceship. In their minds, the aliens would return in their ship just before the Earth's destruction, save the dedicated AnimeWimp members from certain death, and take them to the planet Marinda. Thing is, the alien spaceship needed to be powered somehow, and the only fuel source was the energy found within the people of Central Europe. Apparently, World War II was some sort of plot to kill as many Central Europeans as possible, so that the guy with the Chaplin mustache, no, the other one, could escape Earth with all his friends. Pretty crazy stuff. Anyway, it was the early 90s. AnimeWimp was certain the end was nigh, and that their alien spacecraft would soon arrive. They needed to get their hands on some of that sweet, sweet spaceship power quickly, or else they'd all be doomed. How did they plan to harvest that power? By giving up their body parts. Many members started to mutilate themselves in order to help power the ship. Many male members cut off the parts of themselves that contain the most powerful energy, namely their family jewels. Oh, it hurts to even say it. What they actually did with these chopped off bits remains unclear. Now, from an outsider's perspective looking in, this could all seem darkly comical. But here's where things turn from darkly comical to darkly tragic. In their quest to harvest as much energy as possible, it seems AnimeWimp may have turned to murder. In August of 1993, Andrzej Sielecki, 18, vanished on his way to school, never to be seen again. Because of his interest in ufology, the young man had gotten heavily involved with AnimeWimp, and over time, his parents noticed that his behaviour was becoming weirder and weirder. He'd sit alone in his room for hours meditating, ignoring his schoolwork and friends. Over time, he started to show signs of fear and agitation, saying that he thought someone was out to get him. He stopped sleeping and barely ate any food because he was so worried someone was trying to poison him. Not long afterwards, he went missing. Though many suspect AnimeWimp were responsible, no concrete evidence was ever found linking the group to Andrzej's disappearance. Around the same sort of time, another young man, only 16, also vanished. He too had links to AnimeWimp. The group liked to recruit younger, more impressionable members, much to the behest of the inductees' parents. In 1995, a PE teacher and fellow member of AnimeWimp also disappeared. His remains were actually found in the Odra River. His head had been battered in, and someone had removed his manhood with surgical precision. 2 surgeons who were members of AnimeWimp were questioned, but the authorities were unable to link them to the teacher's demise, and the case went cold. Though all 3 of these cases are still technically unsolved, it's strongly suspected that AnimeWimp were responsible for the teacher's death, and that the 2 aforementioned boys suffered the same fate at the hands of its members. Though AnimeWimp has since formally disbanded, it's believed that they still unofficially exist in Poland in an underground capacity. Since it's extremely common for cult members to become estranged from their families and friends, it's very likely more people were selected for involuntary harvest. Their sudden and mysterious disappearances simply never reported. Question is, how many? Hi guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed these mysteries. Something a little more otherworldly for you guys. It's nice to explore something different every now and then. A huge thank you to Robin Mikkelsen for making the thumbnail for this video. Check out his work by following the links down below. And also a massive thank you to all of my supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon, especially my biggest supporters. Ms. Crypto, The Only Dorita, Sloane Crawford, Silas Gheist, Sarah Ramirez, Procupidine Natter, Philip Westra, Peter Loggeraj, Nadine, Native Beauty, Monica Mendoza, Mira Lancaster, Leonardo Martinez, Infamous-senpapi, Grey White Rabbit, Gina Valera, Expand On, Crawford K McDonald, Connor Lothan, Charlie Lackey, Azrael Warakai, Alex Greensall, Maria Brown, Mrs. Yvonne Rankin, Dappa, BoiZee McSnatchie, Matthew J. Bauer, Teddy Street, Amanda Hanson, Hamish Kay, and Phantom Knight. Thank you guys so much for your continued support, it really helps the channel out. That wraps things up for this one, guys. Remember to smash that like button or I'll smash you, and you'll be hearing from me again very soon. Until then, you all stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.